Now, just because something's intended to look ugly or less than ideal doesn't mean it won't ward people off. A design has to connect with the viewer or the audience, or everything else is compromised. This is especially true when it comes to character design, and that's exactly what we're going to get into here. Recently, a game called Concord failed pretty hard. It was removed from every store just 2 weeks after being released. This can be for a number of reasons. Maybe it's the price point, maybe it's live service burnout, maybe it's the timing. Well, considering there are other new hero shooters like Valve's Deadlock out there doing pretty well, I wouldn't pin it on that. And considering even when the game was free to play, free to try out, nobody was playing it. So that kind of leaves one major criticism that seemingly everybody on the internet is pointing to, and that's the character designs. And so we're going to dive into that today. We will be looking at the kings of the genre, Overwatch, Team Fortress 2, as they are shining examples of what to study and directly compare them to Concord's designs. So we're going to address many questions in today's video. Of course, like what is good character design? And why did these characters seemingly ruin and bury this franchise and potentially this whole studio? And is art subjective, and can it be quantified? These are all things we're going to be going over today. And of course, I'm not directly intending on criticizing any of the artists. I don't mean to demean them in any sort of way or shame them, nor am I going to address any of the bigger kind of political issues that are surrounding this game. This is an art video, this is an art education channel, and I am doing this for the sake of education, so we do not repeat the same mistakes again. So if you're learning production art, if you're learning how to draw characters, if you're making your own video game, this is going to be a video for you. My name is Tyler Edlin. I have about 15 years experience as a concept artist and illustrator. I've done hundreds of character designs over the years, even though I'm not a principal character designer. I mostly focus on environmental aspects and prop design, but design fundamentals are universal. And I have worked for larger properties like Warcraft and Fortnite. So I'm going to just be sharing my own personal experience today. So with that said, let's get into this. Alright, just for a little more context here, Concord is a AAA hero shooter game, right? Those are primarily multiplayer shooters. And while I do feel the artists that are working on this, I've seen a lot of the concept designs in this, I do think a lot of them show really good technical skill, and the game itself looks very technically impressive. From my experience, the blame doesn't go to any one individual, right? This is a large collaborative effort. Artists are usually given direction from the higher-ups, and this is why I said these designs were intended to look the way that they do, right? There is no accident or coincidence here. They are intended to look this way, for better or worse. So, no matter what the intent is, when you throw all your fundamentals, all your design fundamentals, all your art fundamentals kind of out the door, that's going to be a huge problem. So let's take time to really establish what good character design is. Right, so good character design in video games involves a balance of visual appeal, functionality, and in many cases, storytelling. The design itself needs to clearly convey what the character can do, and that means it needs to be easy to recognize when it's small on screen, when it's moving fast, and of course from any camera angle. You can really see that reflected in Team Fortress 2's character designs, and these designs date all the way back to the early 2000s. They're all very easy to recognize. They're communicating exactly what they need to do, and the weapons, as I highlighted here, are very easy to distinguish. This is absolutely critical, more importantly so in the hero shooter genre. This of course means you want to include easy to understand shapes, clearly easy to understand themes, and of course overall consistent execution on these. Every character is clearly organized, easy to distinguish, and do clearly reflect the themes that they have to play in regards to the role of their gameplay, right? Their archetypes. Look at the color palettes chosen here, right? Up here the top is the skin, and then the primary team colors, right? The secondaries and then the bottoms are the metals from the equipment. A restricted palette like this allows the designs to build and establish patterns and variations on those patterns very effectively while maintaining a bit of consistency here. And of course, when you really break down the heads here, like the angles of the shapes, you're going to find a ton of little nuances that keep everything consistent. Compare the angles of the noses, right, to the foreheads, to some of these jaw lines. This is a very good example of a consistent design language. And this really is why Concord, in my opinion, fails with their character design, right? There is a complete lack of distinct identity, visual appeal, and gameplay communication. For a hero shooter, none of these characters are particularly feeling like heroes, more like NPCs thrown through a random character generator. A very successful Overwatch has a lineup of, for their team-based shooter, the designs kind of get a little muddled next to each other because everybody is such a superstar. Everybody is a large, bombastic sort of hero. It can be a little confusing, in my opinion, to discern who's on whose team, and that's what Team Fortress does very, very well. But, right, with Overwatch, the difference between Overwatch and Concord is at least Overwatch displays fundamentally very good character design principles for all of these individual characters. All right, so for today's first topic, let's get into good old-fashioned functional design, right? Our first of our three major pillars, right? This all starts with the silhouette. This is the complete pipeline for designing a character for a game, right? It all starts with the silhouette, which is made up of the shapes, which is going to establish the character's identity. Then we're going to move toward the internal shapes on a particular character and pose, and then it starts with the kind of paper doll poses where you're basically establishing model sheets for the rest of the production team. And then they're going to go build them in 3D, then they're going to texture them, light them, and then eventually animate them, voice act them if necessary as well. But it all starts with that silhouette and why it's so important. A really good silhouette, ideally, will tie together gameplay, art direction, and the story alone. Here's an example of like an okay one, a better one, and an even better one, right? We go from an NPC, regular kind of bloke, to a massive sort of character that's going to have impact whenever it's on the scene. Few quick tips to remember when it comes to having a strong silhouette: to simplify the shapes, highlight the unique features, ensure the balance of these proportions. Posing helps, not always necessary though. Asymmetry is usually a plus, and of course, prioritize readability, again, to make something distinguishable while in motion and from multiple angles. Use negative space wisely, right? The spaces that's coming in and around and in between parts of the character. And of course, balance simple versus complex, right? If you have a character that's overly complex, it's going to be hard to read. Whereas if you have a character overly simple, it's going to be very boring. So of course, another major aspect of functional design is that role representation, right? And this is what Concord really hits the wall on. Character design should match their role in their game, right? For instance, a tank character in an action game might have heavy armor and a very robust build, reflecting their durability. Whereas a more nimble character or fighter is going to be very small, very lightweight, and equipped with much smaller armor. This is very obvious across Team Fortress, Overwatch, and then things get very questionable with Concord. These are all intended to be the healer archetypes. I think it's very clear with the Doctor. He looks like a doctor. The angel, right? That was a symbol for healing and hope and prosperity, like all those good, wholesome things. And then we've got the soup kitchen bouncer. Like nothing communicates that this character is going to come and heal you with this design, right? These are gameplay mechanics based design. With hero shooters, these role representations with the gameplay mechanics are more important than any other genre, I would say. Right? The design should support that, and if a character, for example, has the ability to jump really high or even fly, their design should include features like having wings, looking agile, and then having proportions and silhouettes to visually support that, right? We know in Team Fortress 2 this is the Scout. It's a very agile runner. We know in Overwatch this character is clearly communicating in many levels that this is all about aerial mobility. And then we got this rocket trooper here from Concord, which is again focused on aerial mobility. Nothing about the design is communicating that. And so this is a set of recommendations that could be easily implemented here to improve this design from a gameplay mechanic only. I'm not saying that this is the be-all, end-all of character designs and that this is so vastly superior. No, I'm just trying to make it functional first. And of course, once a design can just get functional from a core gameplay aspect, then you can iterate on it. Then you can do revisions. This is where, a lot of people are baffled because Concord's development was over 6 years. It was over $200 million. And these designs are so fundamentally flawed, it is baffling everyone. Let's just get this character design to function as an aerial character, right, by improved value distribution, more on that later, right, a more aerodynamic helmet, visual jump thrusters on the boots and back, right, vertical stabilizers, Aura Plus, having the horizontal stabilizers would also be a huge thing to have on this character and make it look a little cooler. A nice visible sidearm, because maybe they're not just using a rocket launcher, breathing support if they're going to really high altitudes, and of course, overall improved color combination, right? There's so many different ways that this character could have gone, and it just didn't land. And there's something to be said about the whole color psychology aspect of this, and with the read hierarchy of the way the values are distributed between these characters, right? There's something called like a primary read, a secondary read, and a tertiary read when it comes to these designs. And as you can see, these all represent the very core primitive shapes, right? The square, the triangle, and the circle. These shapes are universally understood across any language and culture to communicate different things for the most part, right? In our civilized world, right? Rectangles are very strong, they're very stable. Triangles, danger, fear, dynamic, very appropriate for this heavy gunner character in Overwatch. Circles are supposed to represent something friendly, something cute, something innocent. Look at any Nintendo character. Look at Mario, lots of circles. Look at Kirby, right? Spitting example of that. So why would this character have, as a big, heavy, tank, strong character, be made up entirely of circles? Again, it is absolutely frustrating from a design perspective to kind of see that is what's getting communicated. If we go even further with this, we could think about how the movement is implied with the design. Most of these really strong designs are pushing an emphasis toward the character's weapon. That's one of their core defining traits as being a heavy character. They got a really big gun. Not so much getting communicated with the Concord design, right? So what we want to do when we're looking at the color and the value distribution, that read hierarchy with a good character design, where are they putting the contrast, right? The contrast is being emphasized with the characters from Overwatch and Team Fortress 2 in the midsection and on the weapons. That's where the highest contrast range is, either with the color palette or with values. So if we desaturate these, we simplify the detail. You can see that. This is where there's a lot of similarities between the successful designs. There's simply a lot of contrast in the place that matters. And then again, with the Concord, the read is flat. The designs are flat. They're dull. They're universally not appealing. Most of that has to do with the fact that there's just no interesting contrast or features on these characters, right? So that's why function is very important, right, when it comes to these designs. All right, let's move on to the second major pillar here, and that is the art, the aesthetics, the visual appeal, the design fundamentals, right? This is a big important one, right? Art style is important. We all know this. Art styles define the overall look and feel of a piece, right? From the character designs to the environments, to the lighting choices, to the shaders, all these things, right? Whether it's highly stylized, abstract, realistic, or somewhere in between, art style is going to dictate all of this. And these art styles set the tone and help establish the visual identity of the work. So art style alone is hugely responsible for setting up how attractive or how engaging the product is to the viewers, right? Concord seemed to just be empty and boring. We can see here, Team Fortress 2 is basing its heritage, on classical illustration, right? Dean Cornwell, the J.C. Linedecker, Norman Rockwell. They're digging really deep into history and a culture to play up the aesthetics of their design. This is making them appealing. Overwatch, right? Really tapping into the nostalgia with the 90s anime, the manga, and of course the classic superhero comics. They're basing all their characters and heroes and the proportions off those larger-than-life characters from the 90s. And all of it's getting interwoven with their cultural goals, and they, again, are a really good example of having a very diverse cast and is working really, really well. And then we have the Concord's designs. Everything from like the universal palette, and it's just not coming together that well. Yes, they are referencing and tapping into classic sci-fi shape design. Yeah, we all know they're kind of riffing on Guardians of the Galaxy, but it's not enough, and it's just feeling like an empty shell version of Guardians. Good character design when it comes to art and aesthetics is all about balance. The simplicity of detail versus no detail, right? The color palette and these tonal distributions, right? Using limited palettes helps prevent the design from becoming visually overwhelming or underwhelming even. It creates harmony within the design and allows the key elements to pop using color strategically. And we can kind of see Team Fortress is playing it probably structurally the safest. They have a very universal applied palette to their designs, makes everything function very highly. But they're also not doing anything to be overly boring as well, which is why they work really well. Overwatch's characters are fantastic. Every character has, one or two color accents that really visually pop. They're balanced out by a number of different neutral colors as well, and they just harmonize very well because of the way they're proportioning that color balance. If we go one step further to look at the tonal hierarchy on these characters, again, that's what it's coming to, is like very clear and easy to understand shapes of value, and they're contrasting in the particular areas they need to. So if we go one step further with these, right, we can see very specific areas. Okay, like we're going to get a little complex here, an area of rest. We'll keep this relatively simple. Again, another area of rest. We don't need to draw attention to the feet in most designs, and then keep, again, the feet really simple. But they all tonally work and flow really well to the higher contrast areas up at the top. The Overwatch characters are doing this very well too, right? We have one leg that's simpler. We have one leg that's a bit more complex. We have one arm that's a bit more complex. We're balancing that out by having the other arm being a little simple, right? A very good textbook example of asymmetry in design, balancing the complexity versus the simple. It's this range of contrast that makes it visually appealing. And then we just have the color scheme on Concord here. It's just not appealing. They don't work well together. It's washed out by loads of browns, oranges, yellows, and offshoot reds. You know what? They just have a very store brand sort of look and aesthetic to them. Like they didn't want to pay the printer to get the really good colors, so we're stuck with these colors. Now when it comes to art and appeal with the visual side of character designs, simply having memorable features, visual motifs, and themes are a great way to create engaging and memorable characters. The visual appeal of an art style can evoke emotions, which is critical for bringing a connection with the audience. And that's why these designs here from various properties, these aren't just hero shooters, but are considered really iconic within the gaming space, right? We've got this guy, Reinhardt, from Overwatch. He's got like a lion, an elemental theme. He's got a really tight color palette. He looks, really old and experienced. Like we could just feel this dude kind of grunting there. And of course, the shape design language is working really hard to pull all that together as well. But really strong aesthetically, there's a lot of appeal. I would want to play as a character that looks this badass in a game. Then we have Cloud Strife, right, from Final Fantasy VII. He's got that iconic weapon that, at the time was a pretty, aside from some Dragon Ball stuff, like, his hair really kind of made him pop for such a low poly character in 97. And that nice muted kind of color palette that he had on the clothes really contrasted all that well. And then, of course, we have the armor suit, the bodysuit from Samus Aran from the Metroid franchise. Absolutely iconic. It just looks badass. And then we got a typical Concord character. Okay, they got a tie and some goggles. But what does this communicate? How does that look aesthetically enticing for me to want to pick this character? There's nothing about that does. And that's part of the art direction issue that I mentioned with Concord here, is like it is so focused on having such realistic proportions, which is kind of like a really tough sell on a hero shooter genre, because every character has a normal person's body. No one's feeling like a hero. No one's going to want to pick it up, right? And they're all just of that same color. They're all the same proportion. They all have the same read. This is why it's just not interesting. So here is a quick recap on all these topics I cover, right? Again, you want to avoid not having a clear visual hierarchy. You want to have materials that have distinct values and reads with them. You want to have key features that make your characters pop and that make them memorable. It's a bonus if you can tie them to a story-related element. You know, if you over-rely on symmetry and perfect proportions, it's going to make things look flat and dull. When you have a clear lack of visual cohesion throughout the entire cast of characters, nobody's going to want to touch it, right? Focus on read hierarchy and implement culture and genre relevance for that relatability. All right, so let's get up to pillar number 3 today, and that is the storytelling aspect of these character designs. Now, storytelling and its importance in any kind of game, of course, is going to vary genre to genre, and maybe it's not so important in a hero shooter genre. Team Fortress 2 is really showing that, right? These characters don't have stories. They don't have any kind of overarching plot. It's irrelevant, but they are aware of that, and that's why they doubled down on having aesthetically appealing characters, right, from an art direction standpoint, and that's why these characters functioned very, very well as well, because they're designing and putting their focus and their energy on the core reasons of what these characters need to do to work. If you're in the hero shooter genre and you can't even get the aesthetics to look appealing, no one's going to want to get invested in the backstories of these characters. You know, Overwatch does this both very well, and that's why it's probably as successful as it is, because it has really strong character visual aesthetics, and then they double down and add really nice deep characters with story and lore attached to that. So it's firing on all cylinders. So the first core part, which I've already kind of touched upon, is having the distinctive personality and the traits, right? Characters should visually reflect their personality, their role, their backstory. Elements like posture, facial expression, clothing, they all contribute to this. So, for example, an imposing villain might have sharp angular features, and a friendly character could have softer, rounder shapes, right? Like, look at all the characters here again, right? Line motif, jet-powered hammer, tank archetype. Looks cool as fuck, right? That's why I want to be that character. Cloud, iconic sword, timeless palette, right? Armor is all story and lore based, and he has relatable themes with his backstory, and a lot of us can relate to that. And then we have Samus, right? Bold armor, it's subversion of the expectations of the character design. When we all found out in like 1989, when the original came out, that Samus was a chick, that blew our mind. Nobody had any idea, but it was awesome, right? And it's a symbol. Samus became a symbol for strength and independence over the years as a result of this. And of course, it draws and reflects classic sci-fi design. Now, we have Concords, right? A futuristic assassin robot. I had to look it up because I did not play this game. But this is supposed to be a symbol of espionage and precision, almost like a gadget specialist. And of course, they're featuring a more minimal design, which has its place. But like none of that is looking visually appealing and reflecting, as well as it should with this design, right? So if we look very specifically at female cybernetic assassin types, which designs here do you find personally more visually appealing? I know I'd easily pick any of these more successful designs over the Concord ones. They just have a certain aesthetic and rule of cool with them, and of course they also look like that femme fatale sort of variant, right? There's just more appealing shapes, more appealing colors, from the classic Ghost in the Shell to the more recently very successful Stellar Blade, which was panned by, some media outlets over the character design, but it did very, very well to help sell that game. The use of color in a character design and their backstory can play a huge part in how they're received and how they kind of work and function. Again, Team Fortress examples, as I've mentioned already, they're purely functional based, and they work great for that. But like even if you look at some of these character designs in Overwatch, right? Like the blue, the color of the character there tells us a lot about their character, their heritage, their backstory. Like we know she's out in the Arctic. We know she's she's a good character, utilizing the blue. And we know she comes from a Chinese background as well. All, again, from her design. A textbook example of what to kind of communicate. And now, I had to look these up because I had no idea based on the visual cues of the Concord designs. This lady up top, she's supposed to be a fire mage. But, like, there's nothing screaming fire mage in her design. Like, there's no symbol of fire. There's no, like, iconic red or orange. It's nothing. Like, she just seems like a nimble sort of caster type, but that doesn't give me enough. And then of course you got this character on the bottom that's supposed to be like a knife wielder, and again symbolizing like agility. Like, why do you have a big red floppy coat with all these weird extra extensions on it if you're supposed to be nimble and jumping around and tossing knives? This is just gonna, the red coat's just gonna put a big bullseye on you. And again, it doesn't really tell me much, beyond that. It's just absolutely baffling. Now, if we talk about world building specifically here, again, Overwatch is the king of this, right? A character design needs to fit with the game's universe, the art style, the color palette, and all these visual themes. Right? Everything about a character's design should align with the world they inhabit. A fantasy game might have characters with elaborate armor and mythical elements, and a sci-fi game might feature sleek and futuristic designs. But the designs in Overwatch are fantastic. They closely tie to the game's universe and world building, right? They do reflect this very diverse and global nature of its setting. Each character has design rooted in their backstory, their abilities, and their cultural or technological environment that they come from. Look at Lucio here, which is a Brazilian DJ with a cool, sleek, futuristic, vibrant design that reflects his background in music and activism. And then Zenya's monk-like appearance, ties in his philosophy of harmony between man and machine. These visual cues reinforce the game's overarching themes of global unity and conflict, blending, a bit of that futuristic technology with the distinct cultural influences. Absolutely amazing. And a huge part, when it comes to the story aspect in a character design is that emotional resonance, right? Characters should evoke a certain emotional response, whether it's empathy, admiration, or fear, right? Designing with the intent to connect to players on an emotional level can make them more memorable and impactful. I've said that a lot throughout this video. And just because something's intended to look ugly doesn't mean it's gonna, repel these people here, right? So designs that reflect their experiences, their emotional journeys, enhances the storytelling. I'm using mostly games from story-based games here because it's just a better example of it. I'm not familiar with all the lore and tidbits of Overwatch and stuff. But right, like if we look at like the character designs from like Joel and Ellie, right? In The Last of Us, their facial animations add layers to their emotion, making them resonate with players, right? Or if we have Arthur Morgan's design, right, from Red Dead, right? His detailed animations, his environmental interactions really draws the players into his emotional journey, making his fate all the more impactful. And then of course we've got Clementine, from the Walking Dead visual novel series, right? Strong storytelling, deep connection with the players, and we witness her go through different aspects of life. We start with her young, we play her as like a high schooler, and we go with her on this journey. It absolutely makes us connect. And then of course we have 2B's design here from the Nier Automata game, which is also fantastic. It balances contrast between the android's robotic nature and her deep philosophical journey. It allows players to empathize with her more existential dilemmas. And of course, it just looks visually intriguing and has a little bit of that sex appeal too, which goes a long way. And then of course, we have minimalism, right? Which I really haven't touched upon too much yet. Here's two kind of more recent and modern characters that have minimal design. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? Having something clean and timeless is absolutely powerful, right? These characters feel alive. They're both very relatable. And that's a lot of it, due to their small movements and animations. They feature strong connections to their game worlds, their themes, and have distinguishable silhouettes for what they need to do. Astrobot has been fantastic. I can't put that game down lately. Definitely give it a try. Yeah, literally scratching my head over these ones. Guys, what did we learn here? Well, good design is clarity, and design needs a very specific purpose to serve. And when you're making a commercial product that needs to make sales, these designs need to connect and serve that audience. This cannot be about serving personal preferences and agendas. This is a service-based industry and it needs to be treated as such. So when it does come to commercial art, I do feel a large part of that is objective and can be quantified. This is why we have traditional standards and fundamentals. Personal preferences will always be subjective. And this is why being a designer can be a bit challenging, because you have to be in touch enough with yourself to understand your own personal preferences and biases so you can set them aside to serve the greater needs, and that is of the design. Guys, I know it's been a bit of a long one, so thank you if you stuck with me to the end here. Guys, we got spots opening in 3 weeks for my design classes over at CGMA. There's links below for everything. If you have any other questions, you want to weigh in your thoughts and feelings on the characters, I'd be happy to have an adult conversation with you below in the comments. With that said, thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.